What's so great about The Haunting of Hill House? No, not that one, or that one, but we might touch on that one at some point. This one, Shirley Jackson's original novel, The Haunting of Hill House. For over 50 years now, this novel has been declared one of the great ghost stories of all time, one of the finest examples of the haunted house story. But is it? Does it hold up today? Is it still frightening? Is it still effective? And is there anything more to it apart from it just being a very good haunted house story? Yes! So let's talk about it. What's so great about The Haunting of Hill House? Well, a lot of things. But haunted house stories like The Haunting of Hill House deserve respect. They deserve to be read in atmosphere. They deserve to be enjoyed in a way that is almost sensory. And I read my copy of this terrifying haunted house story entirely by the glow of my Sirius light. So let's talk about this video's sponsor, Sirius Readers. Sirius Readers make Sirius lights, and Sirius lights use daylight wavelength technology which replicates the daylight spectrum as closely as technically possible. This means that, at least in my experience, when I read by a Sirius light, I feel like I'm reading by the glow of the sun. That of course means that I don't experience any eye strain, but it also means the pages light up so perfectly. If you read in the dark by the glow of this Sirius light, the entire world is shrouded in darkness and the pages of your book just light up. It is very effective, it is very soothing, and it is a perfect atmosphere for reading a horror novel. I don't use anything else when I read. Even if I'm reading on an afternoon, I will close the blinds, I will turn on my Sirius light, and I will be absorbed in my book completely because the world has fallen away. And if you want a Sirius light of your own, click the link in the description and use the code WILLOW24 to get £100 off your own Sirius light. Thank you so much to Sirius Readers for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House was published in 1959, and ever since then, as I've said, it has been held up as a classic haunted house ghost story. And if you've never read it and you know that much going in, you can have a vague idea of what to expect, and you will be right and wrong. That's what's so clever about it. As time passes, we expect artists, writers, musicians to continue to evolve their craft. And while gothic fiction and horror fiction both have their cliches and their sort of unwritten rules, we still expect the genre to evolve over time. We expect writers to explore new themes, new settings, new ideas, new types of characters and events. We expect modern horror to do new and innovative things, and that means when we look back at classic works like this, we kind of assume that they will be simple affairs, that they won't have innovated yet, that books like this are the formula on which modern horror has been built and new ideas have been established. But when you actually read The Haunting of Hill House, what takes you by surprise is the fact that it is very innovative. It is short and snappy and brilliantly pacey. You can read it in a day because it is very addictive. It is a fantastic page turner, and its characters are so full of life, especially the two main female protagonists. But before we get into all of that, what's it about? The Haunting of Hill House opens as you might expect, with a very simple setup. We are immediately introduced to a man called Dr. Montague. All we know about him is that he's a professor of anthropology and that he has an interest in the supernatural. He wants to explore, prove or disprove, and write about supernatural phenomena. He's learned about a house called Hill House. All we know about it is that it's in the US. We are never given a specific state, and that nebulous location kind of adds a sinister nature to it. The idea that Hill House is nowhere or maybe anywhere. It is simply an American haunting. Hill House has a dark and sordid history that he learns about, but we don't learn about it for a good while. He contacts the house's owner and asks if he can stay there for a few weeks and monitor any supernatural activity. He wants to bring along a few people to help him, and so he contacts various people who have at some point in their lives had some kind of supernatural experience. That's it. That's the criteria. But the owner says that she wants her nephew to stay there as well. And the doctor says, yeah, sure, okay. So we have Dr. Montague, we have Luke, the nephew of the house's owner, and we have two women, both of whom have had some kind of experience with the supernatural at some point in their lives. Those two women are Theo and Eleanor. And Eleanor is kind of our point of view protagonist. We mostly see the world through her eyes, and she and Theo are easily given the most personality of the group. Now, in a haunted house story like this, it wouldn't be surprising for the characters to be relatively stiff and two-dimensional, and for the events of the haunting to be the main attraction, but that is far from the case with this novel. Eleanor and Theo as characters and the relationship between these two women is a focal point of this story. As soon as they arrive at the house, we very quickly get to know these women. We get to know their personalities, their attitudes, and the two of them quickly form a bond. They are very, very playful. Now, this book was written in the 1950s, and the way that these two girls talk is borderline juvenile. They are young women, but they sometimes talk like they're on the playground. The way that they play together and suggest very sweet and innocent games to play. They will tell each other lies and jokes and stories and laugh about it all. It is very, very sweet and charming. And I felt two things as this happened. One, queer vibes, and two, foreshadowing. What is going to happen? What's going to go wrong here? What will the house do to these women to ruin their innocence, to ruin their confidence, to ruin their fun? Well, the answer to that is kind of interesting. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the way that these people change during their time at Hill House is pretty fascinating, especially Eleanor. Now, if you've watched Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House, you'll have realized by now these two things have nothing in common, apart from their title and the fact that they share some character names. Eleanor is Nell. Throughout the novel, Theodora, or Theo, starts to refer to Eleanor as Nell. She gives her a pet name. And in Mike Flanagan's show, you've got Theo and Nell, who are sisters. But just because they have nothing in common doesn't mean Mike Flanagan wasn't heavily inspired by the events of the novel and by the characters. Because in the show, his wife plays Theo, and the character of Theo in the show is gay. And in this novel that came out in 1959, there is no explicit mention of Theo being gay, at least as far as I noticed. Or maybe I was too busy making up my own mind about Theo, to the point that I didn't really care if it explicitly said she was gay. I know she's gay. The way that she treats Eleanor, the closeness between them, it is incredibly sapphic, it is beautifully romantic. They go from teasing each other and being cute friends to forming a very rich and satisfying bond. The sapphic vibes around Theo as a character and around her relationship to Nell, it is so charming and sweet. And again, in Mike Flanagan's show, Nell is the real protagonist. She is the tragic heroine of that show. And by the way, I really love that show. I love almost everything that Mike Flanagan makes. And in this original novel, Eleanor is also the protagonist. Her experiences, her traumas, her secrets, they all come out gradually, although as the novel begins, we do learn a decent chunk of backstory about her. Her living situation, her family situation, it's all really sad and tragic. But as the novel comes out, rather than learning more about her, we learn more about the damage that her life, her situation, her family has done to her. Nell is not okay. She seems strong, she seems carefree, she seems sweet and kind of innocent, but over time the cracks start to show in who she is, who she's been, and the things that have happened to her, and our hearts gradually break for her. And at this point you might have realized I haven't even mentioned The Haunting of Hill House. And that's because the book is kind of interesting in how it does its haunting. On the one hand, it's very, very typical, very predictable stuff. During the daytime, the characters talk about the house. Dr. Montague will tell the story of the house and all the tragedies that have happened there, all of the strange supernatural phenomena that people have claimed to have seen. And then the sun will set, maybe they'll go to bed, and the hauntings will start. Strange and mysterious things will happen, like knocks at the door, shadowy figures being seen on the lawn through the window. Anything that you can kind of imagine is more or less there. If you've watched a haunted house story, Many of the beats, many of the creepy moments, you will recognize, you will expect them. Doors will slam very suddenly. Voices will whisper in characters' heads. All of these things feel predictable and rote by our standards because they began with stories like The Haunting of Hill House. It's Shirley Jackson's attention to femininity and the female characters that sets this apart from everything else, and as I said at the beginning, it makes it feel very current. I said before that we expect our modern horror fiction to push boundaries, to explore new themes and ideas, but Shirley Jackson was doing that 60 years ago with The Haunting of Hill House, with We Have Always Lived in the Castle, with all of her stories. That's why she's the GOAT. She is the queen of this stuff. And that remains true. The attention that she gives these women, their backgrounds, the way that they change and break down as the story goes on, the bond that they form with each other, it is so intrinsically tied up with the hauntings themselves. Every night that goes by, a haunting happens and it forms a crack in Eleanor. She starts to fall apart. She is affected by the house, but she also becomes obsessed with it. This is a very vague and minor spoiler for the second half of the novel, but as time goes on, despite the hauntings, despite how frightening and unsafe it all becomes, Eleanor feels safe and like she belongs there. She feels safe with Theo. She says that when all of this is done, she wants to go home and live with Theo. And if that can't happen, Eleanor wants to stay at Hill House. She wants a space of her own because she doesn't really have one. She is a walking, talking tragedy. And as she reveals these wants and these needs, these dreams, whether they be healthy or unhealthy, her relationship to Theo also begins to change and shift. And even though Eleanor has been our anchor throughout the novel, she becomes even more of a focal character from that point on. Suddenly, she becomes the tragedy of the book. Eleanor is someone who wants family, who wants security, who wants to not be let down by people and wants to have a space of her own, even if that space is haunted and potentially dangerous. And Theo is bohemian. She's an artist. She is carefree. She loves in her own way. And it doesn't match how Eleanor loves, although it seems that way at first. And so there is heartbreak here. One aspect of the horror that exists in this novel is in Eleanor's attachment to Hill House. The way that she repeats the name of the place over time, especially in the second half of the book, she becomes really obsessed and she's being haunted. And that's kind of an interesting thing as well, is the house is haunted, but it feels more like Eleanor herself is the one being haunted. And once again, I think of Nell in Mike Flanagan's TV show, in which Nell is the one being haunted. The more I think about it, the more I want to congratulate Flanagan for creating a show that is so distinctly separate from the source material and yet is actually thematically taking so much from these characters. Eleanor is being haunted in both, just in very different ways. Theo is queer in both, but in very different ways. It's fascinating, it's brilliant. Reading one and then watching the other, it really encourages an appreciation for how to do adaptations correctly. As a music fan, something I've believed for a long time is if you're going to cover a song, especially a song that is recognizably of one genre, you should do something different with it. Put it into a different genre, change its tempo, change its style. A great example of this done well, the example I always go to is Jimi Hendrix's cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. They're entirely different beasts. And when it comes to film and TV adaptations of books, I think Mike Flanagan knows exactly what he's doing. I'm so impressed with how he handles this book. He pays homage to its characters and themes while writing his own story. That's clever. That's brilliant. The Haunting of Hill House is frightening not because of its scares, but because of the effect that the scares have on the characters and the effect that the characters have on us, the reader. The attachment that we feel to Theo and Eleanor is intense, and the effect that the house has on them is even more intense, and so we feel the push and pull of this dangerous, magnetic, hypnotizing house through them. Oh, it's brilliant. It's Absolutely wonderful. I love The Haunting of Hill House. I love Shirley Jackson so much. She will forever be the queen of the haunted house. And that's why when I wrote my book, Managing and Other Lies, I was very, very intensely inspired by Shirley Jackson. The title story in this collection, Managing, is a very queer haunted house novella inspired by Shirley Jackson and Franz Kafka. If you love queer fiction and you love haunted house stories, consider picking up and checking out my book, Managing and Other Lies. There are links to it in the description. I am very confident that The Haunting of Hill House will forever be known as the pinnacle of the haunted house story because of how Shirley Jackson treats her characters within the haunted house setting. The haunting is not really the thing. It's more about the haunting, and that is so clever. Also, I don't know if you can see the bite marks. I turned my back for a second and my cat absolutely ravaged the corner of this thing. And I love her even more for doing it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Go buy a copy of my book if you want to support me, and if you're a Shirley Jackson fan, and subscribe for books.